If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what is the scariest, most unexplained thing that's happened to you that you still think about to this day? When I was 13, I moved into my brother's bedroom, as it is an extension to the original house with an ensuite and is far larger than my old room. Originally it was a tiny box room with the entrance to the attic but was extended outwards. The attic entrance is always open, with a permanent set of metal ladders angled up into it. There's a picture of it here. The gray arch is where the original room ended. Within a few weeks of moving in, I'd wake up in the middle of the night to see a figure staring down me, with a white head like a skull and formless black body. It would slowly move down to the foot of my bed and stare me until I moved, at which point it would sink into the floor. Just sleep paralysis, right? And I begged to move into the room and had just got it set up so I wasn't going to leave. I didn't really talk about it to anyone. It gradually became less frequent over time. 8 years after this, my brother mentioned at a get-together that he used to have a sleep paralysis demon when he lived in that room, a half-joking, half-freaked out way to other people when the topic of them came up. He described the exact same fucking thing. Neither of us mentioned it to anybody else at the time it was happening, so we have no explanation for us both experiencing the same thing. A few years ago, I took my dog out for a walk at night. The apartment complex I lived in at the time had enough light outside, so I was never scared of going out for a little walk. One night, as I walked down the stairs, I noticed a large brown furry thing under the stairs. I know for a fact there was 3 thin bushes under those stairs, but that night, whatever that thing is, was in between those bushes. I was too afraid to inspect it, so I walked the dog around the neighborhood for 5 minutes. When I got back, the large brown thing was gone. I stood there for a second before gathering up the courage to go up the stairs. My dog, however, refused to go up. I scooped him up and ran up the stairs into the comfort of my own home. A few days later, I sat in the living room minding my own business. From the corner of my eye, I saw something brown and furry crawl from the ceiling into my room. That night, I had a dream I was being attacked by an unknown creature. I covered myself in my blanket and it scratched and tore at it, yelling obscenities at me. I got angry and launched myself at it, punching and scratching at a large brown furry creature. When I woke up, my dog was there watching me and whining. What to even think this was? In college, I was roommates with my childhood best friend for about 2 years. We are very trusting with each other. We would go into each other's rooms freely and grab whatever we needed. To borrow clothes, hairbrush, perfume, etc., no questions asked, just a knock if we were in the room to let each other know we were going in. Our rooms are across the hall from each other, with the hall facing the kitchen. So from the kitchen you could see down the hall where our rooms were. At the time, my friend had very long black hair and she's very fair-skinned. One day, I get home from work, with my headphones in my ear talking to my mom about my day. I go in the kitchen and grab a snack. I see her walk out of her room and go into mine, leave my room and go back into hers. She looked like she just got out the shower, her hair was soaking wet and she was wrapped in a white towel. Her long black wet hair is what I distinctly remember. Also, she made no eye contact with me, but I didn't think it was weird. I didn't say anything to her since borrowing each other's stuff was normal. I'm still on the phone with my mom, so I don't think much of it. I grab my snack, hang up with my mom and go into my room to watch TV. I figured she's getting ready to go somewhere and we'll talk later. About an hour passes and I go to the kitchen to clean the plate I ate on. I see her in the kitchen making something to eat and I tell her, "Hey, what did you grab from my room earlier? Did you find what you needed?" She looks at me like if I was crazy and says, "What are you talking about?" So I say, "Yeah, earlier when I got home I saw you go into my room and grab something. Did you get what you needed?" Sorry I didn't say hi, I was on the phone with my mom. She asks me if I'm sure I saw her. I said yes, 100%. She tells me to grab my phone and go to her car ASAP, that she needs to show me something. I had my phone on me and she grabbed my keys from the kitchen counter along with her purse and she drags me out the front door and into her car. She then tells me she got home maybe 5 minutes before we started talking. She had spent the night at her boyfriend's and hadn't been home all day. So she has no idea who I saw. I'll never forget the look on her face when she told me this. Complete fear and panic. She called the cops and they came along with the apartment manager. They checked the whole apartment and found no one. Nothing amiss. And they were in there a while checking every nook and cranny. The manager got maintenance to change our locks and gave us new keys that day. My friend then tells me that for a week she'd been hearing noises from her bathroom like bottles moving. And when she went to check she found nothing. I have no idea who I saw going in and out of our rooms, but it looked exactly like my friend. I don't drink or do drugs. Not on meds. This was in 2014 and I still freak out when I think about it. Back in 2008, I lived near my college in an apartment. My apartment was set back from the main road quite a bit and was in a wooded and hilly area. One night, I was out running near sundown. I'm at the bottom of a hill that's behind my apartment, so it was near the end of my run. I look up ahead at the top of the hill and notice 3 guys on bikes just sitting there. Being a 20-year-old female, my spidey senses start tingling. I tell myself I'm psyching myself out and it'll be fine, so I keep running. I'm about halfway up the hill. The 3 guys are still just sitting there, facing my direction. I don't have a phone or anything and nowhere else to go, so I tell myself I'll just run as hard as I can and scream if I need to. Suddenly, I hear something coming up beside me. I look to my right and see a German Shepherd. He's running alongside me. I've never seen this dog before in my life. I can't explain it, but I just knew I'd be okay now. I continued running up the hill with this random dog beside me. When we're approaching the guys, this dog gets slightly ahead of me and runs directly in front of me instead of to my right. He gets to the guys and stops dead in his tracks. I continue running and pass the guys without even making eye contact. Once I'm past the guys, the dog catches back up to me and continues running alongside me. He stays with me until I take the turn into my apartment's very well lit parking lot. He disappears into the trees as quickly as he appeared. I took that route at the same exact time every single day after that for weeks and would drive down that road often, hoping to come across him again. No luck. I never saw him again. My friends are all convinced he was a guardian angel making sure I stayed safe. I'm not really a believer, so IDK, but it's the most creepy, bizarre, and awesome thing to ever happen to me. A few years back I was driving to work through a bunch of back roads. I worked at a casino, so I was driving through Ojibwe territory. I worked overnight, so it was about 10:30 p.m., completely dark. In the rear view mirror I saw something behind me running down the road. It was large and dark. I thought maybe a bear or a deer, but it was hard to tell. Whatever it is, it was gaining on me. I looked down at my speedometer and I'm going 60 miles per hour, nothing should be catching up to me. Out of the corner of my eye I saw movement out of the passenger window. I start to turn my head and I saw a dark furry shape that looked like a head. At that moment I stopped being confused and instead was filled with a sense of dread. It was keeping up and was staring through the window at me. I had a terrible feeling that if I took my eyes off the road and looked over, something bad would happen. It followed for about a half a mile and then dipped into the woods. When I got to work, my native friends / coworkers saw that I was freaked out, so I told them what I saw. They said I likely encountered a skinwalker / spirit and it was trying to make eye contact with me. They said they would perform a ceremony for me to attempt to appease it / make it know I was welcome. Whole thing freaked me the fuck out. Never saw it again, and I drove the same roads for 3-ish years. Okay, so my girlfriend and I were driving back to our hometown from Syracuse. It's about a 3.5-hour drive. It was nighttime and I was driving on a pretty desolate stretch of highway. We were both wide awake, thanks to a few bang energies. There were no cars behind me or in front of me. Just out of curiosity I peek at the rear view mirror and I see headlights of some kind. But they were strange. They didn't look like they came off a new car, since they weren't high-power LEDs. They were yellow in color and theirs was almost like 2 clumps from many small lights put together, but they were situated kind of how headlights were. The headlights looked to be about 3/4 of a mile behind us. I shrugged it off and thought to myself, how is that legal? Those barely project any kind of light. And focused my attention back on the road for about 5 seconds before I went to have a second glance at the strange lights. I look at the rear view mirror and the lights are closer. Much closer. The kind of closer that there is no way any car could close the distance that quickly. The lights were about 300 feet behind us. At this point I alerted my girlfriend so that she could take a look and make sure that I wasn't hallucinating from all the bang I drank. She looks at me and responded, assuring that she sees it as well. We both looked back immediately after that brief eye contact to find the lights again. This time, they were right next to us. I got a closer look at the lights, and sure enough, it was a bunch of small lights out together, but they were dim. Some of them flickered as if they were losing power. It was mere feet away from us. I am a mechanic by trade and have a very good eye for cars, but this thing didn't seem to have a shape. At this point both me and my girlfriend were looking at the lights right next to us trying to see a silhouette of what it is, but neither of us could figure it out. I look at her and ask her what she thinks it could be, in complete confusion. She answers that she has no idea. As we finish making eye contact I look to our left, trying to find the vehicle, but to both me and my girlfriend's surprise it has vanished. I darted my eyes immediately to the rear view trying to find the lights, but there was nothing but darkness staring me back in the face. My girlfriend also noticed that the thing went missing and was looking at me, wide-eyed and silent. We tried looking for the vehicle over and over again, but could not find it. We didn't know what to make of it. I sincerely think we saw something very few other people have seen. I just don't know what it was. I cannot explain it to this day. The memory still lurks in my mind, prodding me to ponder about it. When I was younger, my family and I would go camping in the Uinta forests in Utah. We've been all over these mountains backpacking and hiking. One night when I was about 10 years old, when we were camping near Dean Lake, which is a short backpack hike in. We didn't see anyone else on the way in. It was sort of late in the summer, so the nights were very cold. Well, on about the third night and I was having trouble sleeping. My watch wasn't backlit and this was long before smartphones and MP3 players. It must have been 2 or 3 a.m. I was lying there, bound like a caterpillar in my sleeping bag. After some time passed I heard something, like footsteps. It was very, very quiet. I figured it was something curiously passing by. This area is not famous for large animals / bears / cougars / etc. Not to say they aren't there by any means, just hear me out. I'm curious, I want to see the visitor that is in our campsite, but I know better. I use my ears and lay perfectly still. Our food is about a half-mile away, tied between 2 trees. I'm listening, counting the steps. I could only hear 2 feet, which at first wasn't super alarming since they sounded so far away. I figured it was just a something small, like a deer or something. The whole time I have been intently staring out the roof into the darkness. I haven't moved a muscle. The sounds have gotten quiet and I think it might have left. As I least expected, something peers over the edge of top of the tent, which was huge BTW. My mom and dad could almost stand up in it, and all 3 of us slept in there with extra space left over. I'm petrified. I couldn't move a muscle. I couldn't scream, believe me, I tried. I couldn't make out what it was, but it was for sure on 2 feet. It was completely silent. I could see my breath but not any from this thing. It stared down into my tent for what seemed like forever before silently leaving. I've never listened so hard for anything in my life. I didn't hear a sound as it walked away. I have no idea what I saw, but I can tell you this. It was not fuzzy, the moon was bright, the trees were well lit that night, and I couldn't see any defining features on this creature. If it was a bear, it was the most light-footed, least hairy bear in the forest. My girlfriend and I are in a long-distance relationship. We typically take turns traveling between each other's countries, Australia and Canada. About 2 years ago, it was my turn to travel over to Australia to stay with her and her mom. For a bit of background, my GF's room was built as an extension / add-on to their garage. So to get to it, you had to walk through their garage to get to her room. About a couple weeks into my trip over there, I wake up at around 1 a.m. and the room is just glowing red. I look up at the ceiling and I see this black figure crawling through the ceiling. It moved in such an inhuman way, almost like it was breaking every one of its bones to move. I start screaming, which wakes my GF up, and she looks up at the ceiling and starts to scream as well. Instinctively, I grab my pillow and whip it at the figure. The next thing I know, everything went black and I'm waking up a few hours later. My GF is fast asleep, so I think it was just some weird dream. At that point, I have to go to the washroom. So, I walk through the garage and try to quietly open the garage door to get into the main house. Previously, her mom had mentioned that she was getting annoyed with us staying up late at night and going through the garage door to use the washroom. Since her mom's room was down the garage door hallway, each time we would open it, the door would click loudly and wake her up. So, I'm standing there at the garage door and I try to open it as quietly as possible. As I turn the handle and the door clicks as I push it open, her mom just starts screaming at the top of her lungs. I thought it was out of rage for waking her up, so I immediately closed the door and speed walk back to my GF's room. I climb into bed and gently nudge her awake to tell her that her mom is screaming. She gets up and goes to see whether her mom was still angry and try to de-escalate the situation. About 20 minutes goes by and my GF comes back into the room completely silent. She asks me if I saw the room glowing red earlier as well as a figure in the ceiling. I say yes and she goes wide-eyed and says that she thought it was just a dream too. She then says that her mom wasn't screaming at me. Apparently, when I opened the door, it did wake her up, but when she woke up, there was a black figure standing at the foot of her bed and it was slowly moving towards her. She then experienced a blackout as well and was woken up by my GF checking in on her. Yeah. The entire house slept with the lights on for a month after that. A few years back, I took a ferry by myself, early teens at the time, during February to drive up and visit my cousins and grandparents. My aunt who was supposed to pick me up around 10:30 p.m. got caught in the bad weather. I live in Canada, and her car got totaled. Finally around 12:30 a.m. my other aunt, F36 at the time, and her boyfriend, M39 at the time, came to pick me up, picking up my other aunt on the way. The drive home is normally roughly 2.5 hours, this time made longer due to bad weather and various stops for fast food, and by this point it was around 2 a.m. I was in a trance-like state, caught somewhere in between awake and asleep, when my aunt's boyfriend slammed on the brakes of the car, jolting my awake. Both my aunts slept through it. Crossing the road was the creepiest thing I had ever seen. It looked somewhere between a coyote and a dog, but it was walking on its hind legs, and all of its limbs seemed elongated. It stared at us for a good second, then ran, still on its two legs, into the forest on the other side of the road, letting out this demonic howling, screeching. Me and my now uncle have never talked about it to this day. When I was a kid, I often went to my grandparents' house, with my mother. The house was in France right by a forest and a few abandoned fields, full of grass, right at the limit of the village. I was like 7 or 8 years old, and I used to ride my little bicycle around the house, but I always felt weird when I was behind the house, on the forest side, without being able to explain it. The weird thing is that one day, I was riding around the house, as usual, passing by my mother's parked car, and I saw a little man inside the car, watching me. What was weird is that I remember having seen him first, but not really paying attention to him as if it was normal. I still can remember his face nowadays, nearly 30 years later. He was probably about 50 centimeters high, about 20 inches, and had a mustache, and a weird grin. So, I didn't pay attention to it, and made another lap around the house. And I saw him again, looking at me. Except that this time, I totally panicked and ran inside, calling for my mom and grandma, telling them about what I had seen. After insisting a bit, they came down to check, of course. And of course, there was no one. Oh, and I went back there a few years ago. Grandparents long dead, so the house is abandoned, but that forest feels even more hostile than it did when I was a kid. About 4 years ago I worked for the conservation department of a nearby town. My job was invasive plant removal and trail management. I was often in the woods by myself as I knew what plants to look for and was experienced with trail maintenance. I would work from 7 am 3:30 p.m. Monday to Thursday, so it's not like I was in the woods at night and there were normally people around as I worked. One day during late August, I was walking down a trail pretty far into the woods. I had hedge trimmers with me, which are pretty solid, and worked in a pretty rich town, so, being a small female, I wasn't too worried about being alone. It was getting to be the end of the day, so I was just walking down the path, not actually working. I hadn't seen or heard anyone else in quite some time. Up ahead there was a bend in the path and there was a large shrub blocking my sight from the rest of the path. I got about 20 feet from the bush when the hair rose up on the back of my neck and I broke out in a cold sweat. I trust my instincts. I've had a traumatic experience in the past from not trusting them, so now when I don't feel safe, I believe myself. I dropped the hedge trimmers and sprinted back to my truck. It should have taken me at least 20 minutes to get back and it only took me 10. I had briefly heard something running behind me at the beginning but didn't turn around to look. I sped back to town hall and then went home without talking to anyone. Next day my boss tells me that I'm not going out on the trails alone anymore. A person jogging later the day before had found 6 mutilated cats on the path right behind the shrub. Lived on a 600-acre farm in Arkansas, absolutely no one around for miles and miles and miles. Was out feeding the animals after getting home late one night, just was finishing up and taking the buckets back to the barn. As I was locking up the feeding barn, we had a herding dog. Was a corgi. It just was going absolutely nuts and running into the woods, so I instantly went to investigate to make sure that the animals would be alright. Had a handheld spotlight, shining it into the woods. Saw nothing. The dog was just going absolutely nuts still, and I finally see him running between these trees towards this black splotch. Was somewhat humanoid shaped? But it went in at it and the things just seemed to absorb the light. I've never seen anything like it. Closest would be like an opaque stone, how it doesn't reflect the light, but just kind of nullifies it. Regardless, the dog suddenly was tossed up over my head. Over the electric fence, which is above 6 foot in height and at least 9 feet back towards the fence. I absolutely booked it back to the house to get the shotgun, and when I came back the dogs were still barking, but the thing was gone. So I shot the shotgun in an attempt to scare whatever it was away, and it seemed to have worked. Didn't see it again. Dogs all come back to the house, feed and water them. Give them all the good boy pets for protecting the animals. Now here is the part that made it mega hard to cope with, and it really upset me. The next day, That specific dog who chased in after whatever this was wound up dead with its neck snapped completely backwards on the edge of the woods. I was so in shock and grief at the time I didn't really think about it, but I still to this day have no idea what that was, and the thought of it just makes me sick to my stomach. I live in a relatively rural area. 5 minutes up the road from me is all farmland and cattle pastures. There is a lake that we overlook, and a hill further behind us. Up on that higher hill there have been stories of weird happenings for decades. Figures on the side of the road that vanish, people offering rides to people only for the person to disappear into thin air halfway through their response, even one story of a pregnant woman who was kidnapped and later found walking on the road trying to get to a hospital. Those stories have been passed around in our community since about the late 1950s. Everybody kind of knows not to drive on that road late at night, but it has a much higher speed limit than my road and a convenient cut-through to halfway down my road. Using the cut-through cuts the time to get from the main road to my house by a full 5 minutes or so, and I was tired one night. I'm driving along, alone in my truck. It's a warm summer night, I've got the windows rolled down and I'm bopping to some kind of country song, can't remember which one but I know it was Glen Campbell. On the side of the road is a very tall figure, probably near 6'6", 200 cm, wearing a baggy black hoodie. I slow down and drop the left window, offer him a ride in the bed of the truck if he needs to go down the road a bit. He's handsome. Chiseled jaw, patchy black beard, brown eyes and very pale white skin. He drops the hood to make better eye contact and doesn't so much smile as his face goes less frowny. "No sir, that's all right. I prefer this kind of ambience. Keeps my mind how it should be." I make sure he's certain mainly out of politeness. The road is harsh, very rocky sides, and I don't want him slipping cause it had rained earlier in the day. He smiles a bit, and it's then that I remember what I've heard about this road. Something seems off. He smiles fine, nothing weird, teeth are a bit crooked but they're clean and white. "Really sir, I appreciate the offer. You're awful kind." He speaks with a southern accent, kinda like my cousins but not, more Tennessee than their Raleigh. He rolls his L noises and speaks slowly. "You have a good night." I nod and roll up the window and turn the music back up. As I'm pulling away I check in the side view mirror. He's still casually walking, maybe a bit fast because of the length of his legs, but it's still a walk. I get a bit of the way down the road, cruising at about 45 or so, and a minute later I look in the mirror. He is the same distance from me. He is running now, and keeping the same distance from my truck, which is moving at 45 miles per hour. I'm freaking the fuck out naturally, and it's as I look harder into the mirror that I notice something is weird. He's got the hood back up, but I can still see his eyes. They're green. Reflective green. Like a dog's. I floor it and he stops running after me, slowing down his steps, and I hear his laughter's echoes all the way down the hill of the cut through to my home. I sat up the entire night, had every door locked and a bat in my hands. I did not sleep until about 2 days later when my parents got worried and drove me to my godmother's house, and her husband stayed up with a shotgun pointed at the door to keep me calm. His laughter was in my nightmares. A lot of weird stuff has happened to me in my life, so either I'm haunted by some trickster god type of shit or stuff just tends to get strange naturally around me and I'm too stupid to figure out what's going on. I've chosen 3 things that I absolutely can't explain, and had other people witness it. The first story takes place at a friend's apartment around 15 years ago. We were watching TV and just talking, and the subject turned to ghosts for some reason. I told her that I believed that there was something more in this world that we still didn't understand, but she just laughed and said that she had never believed in that kind of stuff and never would. She then shouted for the ghosts in the room to show themselves, just to fuck with me. She waited, smirking, for a few seconds, and then we heard what sounded like a heartbeat. Like rhythmic thumping. We looked around for a second and found the source almost immediately. It was my purse. It was laying on the table in front of us, pulsating like a heart. I grabbed it and emptied it, but we couldn't find anything that could have caused the weird heartbeat. The second story takes place around the same time, but in another friend's house. He had told me on several occasions that he often heard footsteps in his living room, but I figured that it probably was creaky floors or pipes since it was an old house. But one night when my sister and I were at his place, we heard them as well. It was clear as day. Someone was walking, in heavy boots it sounded like, from his kitchen into his living room and stopped right in front of the couch we were sitting on. The last story happened to me and my dad when I used to live with him and my sister. Me and my dad were sitting in the living room and watching a movie one night. My sister was in her room studying. When sat in the living room you could see the hallway to the left that began at my sister's room, went past the living room and all the other rooms and ended by the office where the family computer was. Both me and my dad saw my sister walk past from her room to the office. We both turned and looked at her. 2 minutes later we saw her again, walking the exact same direction. Me and my dad looked at each other and he pointed out how weird it was that we never saw her go the other way back, and if he saw her again he would ask her what she was doing. And sure enough, a few minutes later she walked again from her room to the office. My dad called out for her and asked her if she was in the office. She then walked out of her room again and said that no. Why did he ask? We have no idea who or what we saw that night wandering the same route again and again, and my dad still considers it the weirdest thing he has ever experienced. My grandfather is tough as nails. The kind of guy who would seriously consider pulling out his own tooth with pliers if he needed, instead of going to a dentist. He's been through some stuff and I've never heard or felt fear in his voice, except once. He used to visit every Sunday, and was extremely punctual. One particular Sunday, he's late. He's also not the type to use his phone, so there was nothing to do really but wait. Finally, we notice his car come round the corner, slowly grind to a halt in front of the house, and he shakily gets out of the car. He walks up our stairs, but there is clearly something off. We greet him as we normally do, and he momentarily snaps back to his normal self. I'm not sure if it was him faking normalcy, or if he was desperate and relieved to return to some sense of safety in our home. He sits at his spot in the kitchen and asks for his usual 2 shots of cheap whiskey mixed with tepid tap water. His face, turning red from the drink, starts to droop. He says he has to tell us something, but he's not quite sure how to go about it, obviously trying not to worry us, but his trademark confidence and bravado is nowhere to be found. He tells us that he had gone to sleep a little bit early the night before. He got cozy in bed, and quickly drifted off. It was not unusual for him to wake up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. He says how at some point during the night, he feels the urgency to wake up. He's asleep in the middle of a king-size bed, and he's facing the left. As he turns to his right, he freezes. At this point, he pauses, almost rethinking his decision to tell us what happened. When he finally continues, he tells us to his right, leaning into his face, was a figure. He described it as large, dominant, hunched over, with its face staring into his. Although it was close, he said he couldn't make out any facial features. We thought it could be a shadow, or sleep paralysis, but he carries on to describe it in further detail. It was wearing a huge, oversized traditional dress and a wide-brimmed hat. When he said he felt that it had bad intentions, a shiver went down my spine. Having balls the size of coconuts, my grandfather did the one thing I would never do in a similar situation. He gave it his back. In an attempt to reset, and still thinking it might be a dream, he turned back to his left and started to pray. After about 5 minutes, he turned back to his right. And it was still there. At this point, while telling us the story, he couldn't even look us in the eye. Desperately, he said, he reached for the rosary beads on his bedside table, and said that it instantly vanished. This story stayed with me for years. Many nights, after closing my eyes, I would expect to open them and find the same figure. But it never happened. He even returned back home and slept in the same bed that night. Years passed and we never talked about it again. Until a year or 2 ago he got married, and his wife moved in for a couple of years. For some reason, they slept in separate rooms the first night. First thing in the morning, his wife asks what he was doing standing by her bedside last night, or what if he found what he was looking for. Needless to say, he hadn't got up all night. So I don't know if this counts, but this is something that still creeps me out. I used to go to a place in the summer as a kid that was well into a heavily wooded area. We were not far from the main road, but because the area didn't have a lot of people, and I think there were some rules about this, protecting wildlife, there are no street lights at all. You need to have a car with decent headlights to see at night. Otherwise it's pitch black. The only way I can describe it is ink black, like you cannot see after a certain point with only the light from your home. As a kid I loved to go out on the swing set at night. I loved how cool it was at night and the stars. The backyard was cut grass that was leveled, and then a wire fence that was only meant to keep deer and small critters out. Not really for any serious protection. My mom would be reading in the house and I would be on my swing. You can't really see out to it unless you went outside and looked at my swing set to see me. I wasn't scared, but one night, I had this bizarre feeling. Like my back is to the wire fence and the only thing behind me was woods and would be the main road below a hill. There is no reason for a person or anything to be out there. There are no dangerous animals except maybe a possum or a raccoon, as they can be aggressive but not deadly. But that night I could not stop looking behind me. Like it felt like I was being watched. Keep in mind I was a young girl, I think maybe 12 at the time, alone outside with only a short wire fence between me and the darkness. I decided to stop trying to swing and look out into the darkness, and I saw nothing because again it's too dark. But the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up, and I don't know why to this day, but something spooked me. Yet nothing happened. I don't know why to this day that happened. Since then I never went outside on the swing alone at night when I was there. Like I said, I don't know if this counts, but those woods I still go to from time to time as an adult, and they still can be creepy when you're alone at night. When I was small, my mother woke up in the middle of the night for water and found me poking and grasping at the front door. Not the handle, the door itself. She asked me what I was doing, and according to her I told her that the door was covered in a white mist/fog substance, and every time my hand came near it, it disappeared. Problem is I don't remember any of this. I remember that house, and I wasn't exactly a toddler when this happened either. I do, however, remember always thinking that the place was cursed. The whole place just felt off. But I tried not to think about it. In fact, here are some other weird things that happened there. My dad once went into the crawl space of the house and nearly fell into a hole which he said was big enough to drive a bakkie, what Americans call a pickup truck, into it. It was also the place where I nearly died from a severe allergic reaction to cheese. I have always eaten dairy, and that has never happened before or since. It did make me stop eating cheese for a while, though. Finally, one of our puppies that was born there died by bleeding from its mouth, eyes, ears, asshole, etc. No explanation, and none of the other puppies were affected either. Many years later my father ended up telling me that he found out the house was actually built on top of a graveyard. Which made me think about that big hole and how it may have been a mass grave at some point. Thank God I don't live there anymore. This didn't happen to me, it happened to my then 21-year-old son, but it's definitely the craziest, scariest thing I've ever heard. My son was a Marine stationed in the Middle East. They happened to be doing an exercise in Jordan with the Jordanian army and were camping out in the middle of the desert. One night, my son was on guard duty with another Marine, and near the end of his shift was sent back to camp to wake up the two guys whose turn it was. On the way back, which was about a mile, he started seeing black shadows out of his peripheral view, darting back and forth. Then he heard loud whispering in a language he couldn't understand. In the distance was a mountain range which was in an unpopulated area, out in the middle of the desert. There are no cars or trucks or other vehicles. The only population nearby was a Bedouin tribe, but they didn't use motor vehicles, they traveled by camel. So that's why my son was really shocked to see lights in the distance. His logical mind tried to tell him it was cars and trucks, but he knew that couldn't be the case. The lights were also traveling in directions like straight up or straight down that a car couldn't do. Meanwhile, the dark shadows and whispers got worse. When he arrived at camp, he was absolutely fear-stricken. He woke the guys, then went to bed. The next morning, he asked the rest of the guys who'd had duty the night before if they'd seen or heard any of this stuff. They all had experienced it, the voices, the shadows, and the lights. They were all terrified. So my son decided to make a Ouija board out of cardboard, and they asked it questions. At some point the Ouija board told them get out, so my son went out into the desert and buried it. The next morning, he woke up and the Ouija board was outside his tent. No one claimed it as a joke, and it was impossible anyway because no one saw where he buried it. To this day, he gets freaked out talking about it. He's not the type of person who believes in ghosts or such things, but, after talking to guys in the Jordanian army, he's convinced they witnessed the jinn. I saw a creature outside our window. The year was 2004. It was around 3 a.m. I woke up and saw the window open. I was hesitant to close it because I was thinking if I get out of bed I would lose my sleep. Suddenly a head pops into view. My first thought was a burglar. I remember trying to figure out which object I would use as a weapon. A hanger? No, too far. Should I choke him with a curtain? No, too dangerous. I decided to hit it with this heavyweight mini statue that my father brought home with him from Vietnam. It was solid marble. And at that moment, that thing levitated. It was slowly moving upwards. And I knew. This is no burglar, this is what we call a swang in my country. It was floating a few meters from my window. Our house was located beside this huge area where our neighbors sell plants and flowers. They have a huge land where these plants grow, and no way someone could walk in and just appear in front of my second floor window. And the window was hanging a meter from the first floor wall, so no way this creature could have scaled the wall and peeked in. Another thing was, it was behind the clothesline, so I was certain it levitated. The creature was floating with its back from the light, so I can't see what it looks like. It was black, bald-headed, broad-shouldered, and I can only decipher the outline of its upper body. It was male. It floated there for a few seconds, then opened its wings. By this time I closed my eyes because I thought it's going to attack me. But it flew away. I did not sleep after that. When I told everyone at breakfast what happened, they laughed at me and told me it was only a bat. We live in a city and there's this huge ass bat the size of a full-grown human. They said it was probably nesting in the tree in our neighbor's garden. I know how bats nest. I've seen a bat with a wingspan of 2 meters and it's certainly not shaped like a human with a bald head, broad shoulder and rounded ear. That afternoon as I returned from school, my eldest brother talked to me about what the halo, it's a Filipino dessert, vendor told him about an aswang being on her rooftop that morning. He was buying his halo when the vendor told him she was woken up by someone on her rooftop. It was scratching at her roof. In my country, most houses have metal roofs, so whatever it was happening on your rooftop, you can actually hear. She had a feeling it was not human and she was so sure it was an aswang, she did not hear it walking there, just scratching her roof. It landed there. The next day, as I was preparing my packed lunch, I overheard our other neighbor, not the garden owner, talking to my mom about a stranger peering inside her house through her window. She couldn't make out the face of the man. She said he's evil. Another neighbor said when she walked out of their compound early in the morning she saw a man standing in front of their gate staring maliciously inside. She said she can't see his face because the streetlights were behind his back. She said she got scared and immediately went back inside her house. Then there was this pig who was making noises in front of our neighbor's door. There is no piggery in the area. I know the creature was the same person our neighbors were talking about. No matter how hard my parents told me it was a thief trying to figure out how to enter people's houses. The incidents happened within days from each other and whoever the person this creature was looking for lived inside the compound next to our house. Apparently, there was a pregnant lady and we did not know this until our neighbor who told us about the aswang, the pig, making noises outside her door. I've received a lot of ridicule from this story years after. Even now, only my sister, who sees things, believes in whatever I saw. After the last incident with the pig, I did not hear any more stories from our neighbor until months after when my father told me he heard someone in the early hours walking beside our house and the neighbor's dogs whimpering. Sometime during the night, they were howling. I've always believed in spirits and supernatural beings. I don't have the gift, but I've experienced unexplainable things. However, I never thought I would actually saw a being that people would only talk about. It changes you. One night, I was in bed with my husband asleep next to me during a thunderstorm. I was watching some show on my phone, nothing spooky, and lightning flashes. On my husband's side of the bed, there are 3 windows and when the lightning strikes, I can see the outline of the 3 square windows through the blinds from my peripheral. While watching my show, I all of a sudden get the feeling of dread, like the feeling before sleep paralysis occurs. I'm trying not to feed into the dread and continue watching my show when lightning strikes and I don't see the square outlines from my side view but a shape of something, like a person standing there with long hair. I instantly get goosebumps and try again to not feel scared when my husband starts to make struggling noises in his sleep. I have had sleep paralysis before, so I know what it's like. What I did, as funny as it sounds, was to put my phone in my left hand and use my right hand to punch and swing the area above him, as though to attack whatever may be on top of him. He didn't let up much on his noises. I rubbed on him aggressively to wake him up. He wakes up a bit and is a bit annoyed and says, "What? Babe, you were making noises like you were struggling, are you okay?" I asked. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a bad dream." I asked him to tell me. He said he was being chased by an ugly witch and she caught him and jumped on top of him and started to attack him. Instant goosebumps. The silhouette I saw kinda looked like a long-haired woman who may have been the witch, who knows, but I finished my episode and told him what happened the next morning. We both agreed, definitely weird and random coincidence. I camped in a Yukon Canadian Regional Park along the Alaskan Highway as part of long solo motorcycle adventure. On the way I saw a grizzly bear and 2 cubs on the road. I waited for them to cross. I was like, that was pretty cool. Then when I was making camp for the night, about a mile from there, I rode past the tent camp area and it had an electric fence around it. That wasn't where I was camping, I guess. That section was closed, locked, and there was no one there. I had a campsite in the RV area. By this time it was almost dark and it was raining. I basically had 3 options: try to scale the electric fence, ride my motorcycle in the dark on a wet dirt road, or set up my tent and take my chances. I picked the last option. I heard all kinds of noises. I was wet, cold, and fucking terrified. Oh, and pro tip, if you go camping in Canada they give you all kinds of firewood but huge logs that are not split, so bring your own axe or a hatchet or something. Unless you're a Bear Grylls, you are not splitting a log with a knife. When I was younger I used to live out of town near a river on a farm type property. We didn't have electricity yet and we used a water pump from the river to get water to our house. Needless to say, I spent a lot of time outside playing in the woods instead of sitting in my creepy dark house. I was about 8. Well, I used to go out into the woods, and on the other side of the woods there was another house with a large property, and sometimes I would even come across their dog and we would run around the woods together pretending to find interesting things. One time a young boy stumbled across me while I was scouting out a tree for a treehouse. He was searching for his dog, the same dog that I played with several times out in these woods. I told the boy I hadn't seen the dog in a few days, and I helped him look for the dog that day. He said it was fine and that he would probably find the dog waiting for him at home. That day when my dad asked me how my day went, I told him about the boy looking for his dog. My dad said, "What are you talking about? What boy? Where did he come from?" I told him he came from the other property on the other side of the woods, and my dad said that the only thing out there was a barn and an old burned down house. I couldn't even believe it, because I swear I had seen a non-burned down house in that clearing. I definitely checked it out the following day, and my dad was right. I must have seen the barn, because the barn still looked pretty intact. It just looked old. I still played out in those woods, but I never saw the boy or dog again. My wife and I are over the road truckers. 3 nights ago, I drive night while wife drives days. I was around the Navajo Nation area off of I-40 going east near Albuquerque, New Mexico, but still in Arizona with a load of produce. About an hour into my drive, around 9 to 10 p.m., everything goes all slow motion and I see a guy in a green hoodie on the side of the road. He does the Wakanda Forever pose, looks at me, and he has no face aside from this super sinister non-human super wide smile showing sharp teeth like some sort of predator. His skin was ghostly white, and when he looked up at me, I watched his limbs elongate and mist-like wings sprout from his back. Mind you, I am cruising along at 70, so this encounter should not have lasted what seemed like just under a minute. It was like time had frozen. My first thought, because I was nearest to Navajo lands, was Skinwalker, but this appearance really does not fit the mo of said supernatural creature. This encounter has been on my mind ever since and is actually bothering me, unlike most other supernatural shit I have seen in the past. This just felt malicious in nature. I am just trying to figure out what it could be and if it is related to some legends for the area, or native in origin. I am pretty well versed in native legends and culture, so I don't think it is native related, but I could be wrong. I believe I have came into contact with a skinwalker. I used to live about 4 miles into the woods, on a dirt road. The day it happened, I was outside a few hours before the sun went down, letting my dog out. She all of a sudden ran down the road to where I couldn't see her. I tried calling her back by whistling a few times. She finally came back, so I brought her inside and chilled for a bit. I then got a phone call from my friend, so I went back outside with my dog, and it's just getting dark out. Not even a minute into the conversation, I hear whistling. I didn't pay it any attention until I heard it again. I noticed it was the same whistle I was doing earlier. Low pitch to high pitch, spaced out just the same. It happened one more time, and then a huge stick or rock or something smashed down to the ground about 20 feet away from me. My dog got scared and ran back to porch. I said out loud, "WTF was that?" And my friend on the phone said he heard it too, then the phone just completely turned off. There was no way it could be dead because I charged it to about 70% before I took it off the charger and went outside. Needless to say, I booked it back inside. Creeped me out so bad. I started looking up stories to see if people have had that same experience, and boy did I find a lot of them. Apparently, there's a thing about how you're not supposed to whistle at night because it lures in skinwalkers. Well, this thing heard me while the sun was still out, so I would say just don't whistle at all. At least not in the woods. Used to live in a townhouse next to a highway that had a little tunnel under it, taking you to an open field/forest area on the other side. The tunnel was fairly long, probably 100 yards or so, and full of graffiti. It would get almost dark in the middle of it when walking through. I have a big dog, and would take him often through this tunnel to the field on the other side to play ball. By often I mean 5 days a week usually. One day we were walking through the tunnel to the field, and at the end of the tunnel, almost out on the field side, was a Home Depot bucket full of rocks with a wooden stake and a cardboard sign handwritten $1 to pass. Or else. I laughed a little bit and took a picture with my phone. Then my dog and I walked through the tunnel. He was off leash, as he is very well behaved, and usually would take off running to his field. Except this time he wouldn't walk out of the tunnel. His hair went up and he started growling even though I was calling for him. I looked around and saw nothing, then heard this incredibly eerie giggle in the distance that sounded like it was coming from above the tunnel. Then heard footsteps. My sympathetic nervous system kicked in and I bolted back through the tunnel all the way to the other end without stopping or turning around. My dog ran right behind me. When I got to the other end and looked back down the tunnel, there was a tall person, in an all-black robe wearing a white, clownish-looking mask standing at the other end staring back at me. Still gives me the chills thinking about it. Never went back through or near that tunnel. This happened back in 1998 when I was 9 years old. I was walking back from my friend's house at around 10 p.m. It was only a small village in England and quite safe to do so back then. As I walked home, I had to pass a small electrical substation at the top of the housing estate. This setup is quite common for small villages/towns in England. I was on the opposite side of the road to said substation when I noticed a large man in a full skin-tight black suit, head to toe. The man was bending down on one knee looking straight ahead. He clearly hadn't noticed me. However, when I said something on lines of "what the hell is that?" the man immediately turned his head towards me. I didn't see any recognizable facial features. No eyes or mouth. I can only describe it as sort of a full-body black carbon material-like suit. Within seconds the man shot up and sprinted away from myself, but still in the original direction he was looking. Now this is going to sound strange, and it's the main reason I rarely ever tell anyone this story. After the man sprinted for no more than 5 meters, he vanished into what I describe as a flash of bright multicolor light. Then that was it. Gone. After this I sprinted home and remember telling my parents. They didn't believe me, and nothing else like this happened to me again. There is a similar incident that happened in this same village to a friend of my sister's. However, this happened nearly 14 years later, about half a mile down from the substation. As my sister's friend was driving home, again late at night around the same time, she said a large black figure appeared in the middle of the road no more than 20 meters in front. She slammed her brakes on, stopped and got out, but there was nothing to be seen. She described the figure almost exactly as I had seen some 14 years earlier. Large black figure, head to toe in what seemed to be carbon-like suit. She was very shaken by the incident. Long story short, we were 4, all around 18. I was house-sitting for my aunt in my village, and invited my 3 male best friends over. At around 6 p.m., we decided to take a little walk in the village. Not far from the house, there are a few acres of solely agricultural fields, and that's where we went. The sun was setting down as we were approaching a little piece of woody land that belongs to my family and used to have a small castle on it, destroyed centuries ago, of which just some very small pieces of wall remains. So of course I was proudly telling them about it, and added that my grandpa always told me it was a quite dangerous place, and I always supposed it was because of its close vicinity to a very steep ravine. There were 2 rumors about the place, a down-to-earth one saying that some young people were trafficking there, and your usual witches come here for their bad deeds one. Grandpa used to tell me not to go there, especially at night. And that's when the strange thing happened. We heard a scream. Nothing I ever heard before, not quite human. At first my friends, who were all from the city, thought it was some kind of raven, but let me tell you, it wasn't. I know the screams of the birds you can hear in my village. So I told them we should hurry back home, and we did. Once we were home and it was still fresh in our memories, we went on the internet to check wildlife screams. We found nothing alike, no birds, no other animals I knew were roaming the place. I even thought it could be a fox, as their screams are quite surprising, but no. To this day we still have no idea what it was. I never heard such a thing again. This story is still known as the human raven case between us. Around 2007, 5 of us drove up this old dirt road. It's well known in the area. Just outside of town, but takes about 45 minutes to drive down it. It's not maintained at all. We spent a lot of time on that road wandering the woods around it. This day, we drove about 30 minutes in and stopped. 3 of the guys in the car with us were gonna smoke a bowl. We were all like 17, but myself and another guy weren't into pot. The other guy especially. He got out of the car and started walking back towards town. Feeling bad, the driver wanted to at least drive him back to town. He refused to get in the car. He's a pretty stubborn person. Well, eventually, it turned into us all joking and being assholes. We're slowly driving next to him, he's messing around. The road was raised a bit from the tree line, which was about 20 feet from the road. The walking friend jumped down off the road and went to run into the woods, then came to a complete stop. That's when we all noticed a man standing there just in the tree line staring at us. It was weird. Walking friend got back onto the road and continued walking. We're begging him to get in the car, but he won't. I looked back, and now the man was on the road slowly following us up the road. Friend wouldn't get back into the car and we're still quite a distance from town. Another friend got out to walk with him at least. We drove slowly with them, old man still following along. Keep in mind there is nothing on this road. Nothing. This dude was just standing there in the tree line. Very strange. Eventually, another man emerged from the woods and started following. They followed us right up until the main road was visible and other cars could be seen, then they retreated back into the woods. My last year at uni, I lived in a 4-bedroom house, with a ground floor, then 2 floors with 2 bedrooms each. My friends had the first floor bedrooms, I was on the second floor, and the bedroom next to me was empty because the guy who had rented it was staying with his girlfriend. I don't think he ever slept there. My bedroom and his had small crawl space cupboards in the corners. I come home from uni one day to find my friends discussing noises sounding like footsteps that they've heard from my floor at night, when I was asleep. I laugh, because apparently these noises are loud and I have heard nothing. Because I don't believe them, I offer to go look at the crawl spaces. We go upstairs, I open the door of the empty room, and right as I open the door to the crawl space in the other corner of the room slams shut. We freak out. There's no reason for that door to have been open in the first place. So we grab kitchen knives, hole up in one of their rooms, and wait for a friend to come and check the cupboards and attic. We never found out what those noises were, but it was the scariest thing that happened the whole year we were there. I used to work in a nursing home where I cared for dementia patients. Every patient on the hall I worked on would steal spoons from dinner to give to the kids because they like shiny things. It got to the point where once a week I'd have to go through everyone's room to take back the spoons. I asked the patients about the kids many times but never got a good answer. I'd hear things like they just live here or they stand outside in the snow and look in the windows or they're my friends who visit. Wouldn't be so weird if they all didn't do it, but it was everyone, the ones who were still capable of speaking anyways. One time at 3 a.m. one of my patients started screaming, so I ran in her room and found her laying in bed, seemingly fine. I asked what was wrong and she said that boy is here again and won't get out of my closet. I'm scared. Like me too, Dolores, what the heck? This didn't exactly happen to me, but I got some backlash and bad vibes from it. My best friend and his mom were moving out of their house, they were the only ones living in the house, and he went to take one last selfie in his room. When he showed the picture to his mom, she goes, "Who is that?" Upon further inspection he notices there was a straight-up white face almost like a mask looking over his shoulder from the attic hatch above his room. He always heard things from the attic but never saw anything. A few weeks later we went on a wrestling trip and stayed in a hotel. He showed the pic around to everyone in our room, and then some spooky things started happening. In our room we began hearing knocks on our door when nobody was there. We also saw flashes or glimpses of a figure in the mirror in our room. Everyone was a little freaked out about it and thought it could be the demon from the picture, and my friend who took it became so paranoid he played Bible verses to ward any demons off all night. He said ever since he took that picture he has had weird things happen to him.